talk, and we're joined by Dr. Andrew Landers, who is going to talk about precision spraying with precision fruit growing for the next hour or so. I just thought, as I'm sort of chair or warm-up man or whatever you'd like to call me today, I thought I would just go through a few rules of the house. You'll be thrilled to know that you are all muted, so even if your phone goes off, none of us will notice. We are planning on recording, and you may have noticed in your top left-hand corner there that we are recording the presentation today, and we'll make it available on the website later. If you have any questions to ask, if you notice at the bottom, we have a bit of a chat box there. If you type and you want to raise a question, you can either address it to myself, or you can address it to Sarah as host, or address the question to everybody. And we'll either roll with it as Andrew goes, although I suspect there will be time for questions at the end. I don't know which you would prefer, Andrew, but
I think I prefer at the end.
Okay, so if you've got a question, type it in the chat box, and then we'll fire away at the end. And we may even, I dare say, if we have time and we've got time for questions, Sarah, you might want to unmute everybody, and then we'll take the questions in order, which makes it a little bit better than me reading them out. I will, at this point, just give you a sort of a brief, I was about to say the usual phrase about for a man who needs no introduction, but Andrew kindly shared his bio with myself. So I'll just say Andrew studied and taught agricultural engineering in England, joined the faculty at Cornell University in 1998, and was based at the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station at Geneva for 20 years. He directed the International Application Technology Program, and his teaching, extension and research appointment involved the use of engineering solutions to provide effective spraying. His research group worked with application systems in fruit production across the world, and he believed in a multidisciplinary approach to pesticide application, working with biologists to ensure engineering techniques were biologically effective. He retired from Cornell in 2018 and now runs the consultancy company Effective Spraying. He's the author of 3 books: Farm Machinery Investment and Management, Effective Vineyard Spraying, and Effective Orchard Spraying, published by effectivespraying.com. Dr. Landers is frequently invited to speak at orchard and vineyard conferences around the world. He's renowned for his informative presentations that are delivered with a captivating style. You have raised the bar for yourself with that bio, Andrew. Yes. So I'll hand over to Andrew, and I suspect Sarah will put the presentation up.
Okay, I'll put it up, Sarah, then I can click as I go.
Mute mic.
There we are. Okay. Now, has it come up? Share. Okay. Everyone hear me? That's the main thing. Okay, right. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Particularly good afternoon to my former friends and colleagues, some of you I've not seen for 20 years. And I'm glad to see, Richard, you're able to multitask like always, so congratulations to you. Anyway, as Andy said, I'm going to talk about precision spraying within precision fruit growing. You'll appreciate that precision means different things to different people. So if I was talking to a group of apple or grape growers, to them precision spraying would mean taking their existing sprayer and fine-tuning it to apply the product precisely to the canopy. Whereas to most of us, particularly in the institution and other people involved in research and development, precision spraying these days would refer primarily to the use of electronics and sensors and monitors, that type of thing. And so I'd like to talk to you about the latter part today, precision spraying within precision fruit growing. I'd like to draw your attention to my co-authors and my 2 major researchers for the last decade, Tomàs Pelea and Jordi Lawrence. Both are in Catalonia, and so can't be with us today. But anyway, they've contributed a lot of the work that you're about to see. So as Andy said, I have been on the faculty at Cornell for 20 years. And then I retired in December 2018. So I spent a year wandering around, wondering whether to stay in Trump's US or come to Boris's England or Boris's UK. And so having 4 granddaughters living in the UK has resulted in my return. And I live in this beautiful, bucolic area of South Shropshire, North Worcestershire, and North Herefordshire, near Tenbury Wells. So it's really handy because of my work with fruit growers. My position at Cornell was fascinating, in fact, so much that I looked at using engineering methods to improve pesticide application. And we had 3 major thrusts. The first was to compare different sprayers. As you know, there are so many novel systems developed all the time, and the growers who funded my research wished to know whether these things worked or not. So we did a lot of work on that. We then did lots of methods of improving their existing sprayers. You'll appreciate in growing grapes, as an example, growing grapevines, that it entails a huge capital outlay. Besides all the posts and trellis, there's all the stainless steel tanks and the press and bottling machines, all sorts of things. So the last thing they think about, and unbeknown to most of them at the beginning, they'll need a sprayer. And so the sprayer really is the Cinderella of the grape industry. And so it's always an afterthought. And so they have no money left. And so we looked at lots of simple methods to improve deposition and reduce drift. And then, because I had a 60% extension appointment, we would develop interesting ways of showing the growers how this science could be applied to their work. But the challenge for the fruit growers throughout the world, as you can clearly see, is to primarily reduce drift and improve deposition, reduce operator and machine contamination. And you can clearly see from the 4 slides on the left that or 2 on the left, 2 in the middle, drift is a major issue with the traditional air blast sprayer. And the air blast sprayer is probably responsible for 90% of fruit spraying in the world. And so you can see the sort of mess it can make on the tractors at the bottom. You see the bottom left, well, and the middle lower photo are John Deere's. As you tractor buffs will recognize them. John Deere's very expensive tractor, as you know. In fact, the paint is what makes them very expensive. And so I always quizzed growers, why on earth do you spray it in the left-hand case with Surround, which is a kaolin clay, and on the middle one, diphane. And you can see the difference. You can see the contamination that exists. But above all, everybody's aim is to produce quality fruit, be it from apples, avocados, all the way down, through to satsumas, and in the case here, quality wine. So the first thing the engineer needs to look at is to know what is the target. And the target in this case are varying canopies. And you can see, first of all, we have different row widths. The row distances I've seen can vary considerably between 1.5 meters wide, which is incredibly narrow, right through to 3 to 4 meters wide. One size fits all is the classic farmer's comment. And as you know, in practice, one size fits all is another expression for a compromise. And so neither of them work out at all well on any case. And then we have, of course, a growing canopy. And you can see with the different dates here of Cabernet Franc, how we get variation in the target. Apples are very similar. Long gone are the traditional apple trees that most of you remember from your childhood. We're now going to modern apple orchard systems, tending to be in the spindle type system. And so whilst the acreage or hectareage or the area will remain the same that the grower has, the number of rows increases dramatically. And so we get a change in crop density. They're very narrow canopies. They're like a hedge, very narrow row spacing, a very narrow canopy. Our canopies can be 0.75 of a metre wide in some cases, and plenty of rows per hectare. Sadly, from my point of view, most, particularly apple sprayers, tend to be of 1960s technology, which produce too much air speed, have no direction, and so in a nutshell have zero finesse. And this is really a great challenge, which I enjoyed for 20 years. So as we all know, there was a development in precision farming many, many years ago. And we'll come back to that to talk about some work in the 60s at Silso as we progress. But so trying to be precise in spraying is important. And so we started to look at simple systems. My penultimate slide will look at what about the adoption of precision technology. And so in this slide you see in front of you, we tried to look at simple sensing systems. So we took some banner sensors. These are you can see them on the top left and lower left photos. These are these small yellow sensors. They cost about 120, 140 pounds. And you see them in shop doorways, clicking people in and out for footfall monitoring. And so we took those, connected them to a little black box that we developed, and then to a solenoid valve system, which would open or close spray nozzles. And you can see clearly in the bottom left, as it's following the canopy in early spring, then only the lower two nozzles are on. And then as it sees the heavier canopy, more nozzles would be switched on. And as you see in the bottom right, when it passes a post, again, the infrared signal opens up all the valves, so you squirt the post. But that's still minor in comparison to the savings that we make. And so you see here, 2009, 2010 results. We had in early season spraying in 2009, a 40% reduction in spray use. This is stunning. If farmers follow the message that they should put on quality produce, quality pesticides early in the season to get very good preventative measure in grapes and apples, then 40% reduction is very impressive. The following year, earlier season, different season. You appreciate with fruit crops, because we're working a three-dimensional canopy, we have huge variations from season to season in the amount of canopy in the early to mid canopy season. So you can see that we were getting reduction. Once we hit mid canopy, the full canopy, then the effect in a good vineyard or orchard is minimized considerably. But more of that in a while. Just at the same time, we were having discussions with others about autonomous tractors. And as you know, there's been huge interest in this. And so a number of us got together with the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And we got this stonking great grant from the feds for nearly $4 million to develop an autonomous tractor for use in citrus. As you appreciate, citrus is a major crop, particularly then in Florida and California, and so would have, and is farmed on very, very large estates. For example, the field we did our trials in was 13,000 acres without a public highway. So these worries about the tractor going wild and running over pedestrians and things was not really a consideration that we had in our trial. I'm sure others have that problem quite frequently, but we didn't seem to have that. So in conjunction with others, we did some trials down at Southern Garden Citrus in Florida, and we developed the autonomous sprayer to fit on the back of the autonomous tractor. And John Deere supplied the tractor, which you see here. Duran Whalen supplied the sprayer. They're a popular sprayer in the US, traditional air blast. And the whole thing was brought about by the change in the growing habits. So citrus is affected by a little insect called a psyllid, and the psyllid distributes a thing called, or carries, greening disease. Greening disease is devastating. So for example, this orchard we were working in was replanting 15% of their trees per year. So that slide you see, it clearly shows 2 replant trees at the beginning and then a mature tree within the same row. The mature citrus trees, those of you who have never seen them, are extremely dense and so provide quite a challenge. What I've done is write the references to the papers that we published at the bottom of the various slides. So if some of this interests you greatly, you can go later and look them up, because as I say, Sarah said the presentation will be on the web. Okay. Because I work so much through the extension work, or advisory work if you wish, work with farmers and growers, I'm extremely aware, and having worked in England for 20 years before I jumped ship, I'm extremely aware that farmers are very cautious with their money. And so I knew that a $4 million research project on an autonomous sprayer and autonomous tractor wouldn't fly in upstate New York with our fruit growers, nor would it fly anywhere else in the US for that matter, or in many parts of the world. I thought we must develop a simpler system. You know, LiDAR is fine for some, but not fine for many. And so we needed to develop a simpler system that the growers could understand. Before I leave the autonomous tractor, during our research of that period, it reminded me of the work done at Silso in the 60s by our former colleague in the Western branch, Richard, Peter Finn-Kelsey. And Peter did a lot of work at Silso where they followed a buried wire in an orchard. And so, you know, things go round and round. So it's quite interesting that we continued with that type of work. Anyway, back to the simpler system. So we can buy ultrasonic sensors in the US for a very low price, and probably here the same. And so it sends out the signal, so it acts as a loudspeaker, sends out the sound wave, and if there's something in the way to intercept it, the wave bounces back as an echo. If there's nothing in the way, of course, it passes through, any gaps in the canopy. And so we developed a canopy sensor system to look at how it worked. Would it work in the apple trees? And when Tomas Pelea joined me, he was a computer electronics man from a farming background, but wasn't an agricultural engineer as such. But he struck on this idea of measuring, as you see in this slide, the distance T2. This is to take a range. We soon discovered in our field trials, like anyone that works with crops, that in this case, trees and grapevines aren't planted in straight rows. We like them to be, you know, we can use laser planters, GPS planters, but not everyone has those plantings. And so the trees are never usually dead straight, nor can people drive tractors in a dead straight line, particularly older tractors. And so by using this range, we can overcome the problems or the vagaries of wobbly rows and wobbly tractor driving. We mounted 4 sensors on a mast, as you see at the front of this. This is a vineyard sprayer, a little Berthoud French sprayer. And you can see different heights for different targets for different crops, okay? Up 2 meters for the vines, as you see there. Our results in 2014 were very promising. And you'll excuse that on the x-axis, the American way of writing the date, but they paid the money, so they get the graph. And you can clearly see that as the season progressed, as the canopy got heavier, we could see a variation occurring in the signal we were getting from our sensors. And again, was very promising, we could see a variation between the east and west side of these trees, and similarly with the vines. You'll appreciate that particularly well, apples and grapes, they like a lot of sunshine for ripening. And so you tend to plant them according to the trajectory of the sun, and so you get a better variation one side or the other. Other thing we noticed in vines, this was a salutary lesson to us all in fruit research, that in August, at the end of August in 2014, we had a hailstorm came through our research station at Geneva and destroyed everybody's field trials. So our canopy monitoring was destroyed, and you can clearly see our density figures dropped. At this stage, our signal dropped considerably in August because the leaves were shredded and a lot were taken off. And then they net vines to try and stop the birds eating the fruit in some parts of the world. And so again, you can clearly see the netting effect, which tends to compress the canopy and so makes a denser canopy, less penetrable to spray. And so the sensors were picking this up. So this gave us great heart that we were doing something correctly. But we didn't know how this related to actual canopy density. All we were getting were signals from an ultrasonic sensor. How is this related to canopy density? And so we asked the horticulturalists at Cornell, how do they measure it? And they use a very scientific method, which comprises of a bamboo cane, which you prod into the canopy, and you measure the number of leaves and the bunches of fruit that are touching the bamboo cane as you pass it through. And so using this system, we built a frame, so we had replicable results, and you can see the frame, you can see the dimensions of the frame. And so once a week, my team would go out and measure canopy density with the bamboo cane, following the traditional horticultural method of measuring canopy, and we would drive past within half an hour with the ultrasonic canopy sensor, and we would then compare our results. And so here we have 2015, 2016 now, 2 vineyards, Vignoles and Cabernet Franc, and Macun as our apple variety. And as I've mentioned, we go through at weekly intervals. So here you can see the Cab Franc as it grows through that period. And here are our results. We can see clearly that when we overlay on the right-hand graph, the PQA results, how many leaves, bunches of grapes are touching the bamboo stick, against the voltage we're receiving, you can clearly see we have really good results. We're very, very impressed with that. When we look at the variety Macun, the apples, you can see the apple habit here, the canopy, and you can clearly see the growth over the season. And again, we're getting the bottom right-hand graph, you can clearly see the similar results as we did with grapes. So we're picking up this changing density, which is what we want, because we then need to move it to the next stage. And many people who look at precision farming stop at this point because they're not agricultural engineers. They don't realize, well, actually now we're going to do something with what you've discovered. And so let's apply it. So in this, because we're so involved with spraying machines, we persuaded bean sprayers, this is part of Duran Wayland, to lend us this Taras sprayer for apple trees. And we went off down and sprayed trees over a couple of seasons. There are 2 aspects to spraying, which even growers get confused about. One is that, there are 2 fluids. One fluid is the liquid, obviously, the spray, but the second fluid, of course, is the air. And we've done a lot of work on airflow in other areas of fruit growing. But in this case, we'll just look at liquid flow. When we did our citrus trials down in Florida with the autonomous sprayer, we used pulse width technology nozzles. These are capstan nozzles, readily available throughout the world. And we fitted the capstan nozzle or nozzle body with a Wilger nozzle tip. Wilger, like T-Jet, but Wilger made in the southern states, and onto the side of the sprayer. And we could electrically change the flow rate coming out of the nozzle tip. So it uses pulses, as you know, just like a bubble jet ink printer that would fire dots of ink. Well, this would allow dots of spray, if you wish, to be fired to the target into the airstream. Wearing my hat, though, as someone with their feet firmly stuck on the ground, I would suggest, and knowing growers the way I did after 40 years, I was thinking, they won't buy these things. And it's not because they don't work, they work quite well, but growers have a nasty habit of adding things to the spray, like liquid fertilizers, which really block up things left, right, and center. Foliar feeds, seaweed, what a host of things are added to the sprayer, not just pesticides, and put in some cocktail and regularly screw things up. And so we went for the simplest system that the farmers are familiar with, and that is, in this case, the Leckler Vario Select nozzles. These are nozzle bodies that can switch on and off. So let's look at that. Here it is in our apple trial by using, in our case, 3 nozzles. The diagram on the right shows 4, but only 3 in use. So let's look at those. We could select 3 nozzles, and we could either have any one of the 3 working. So that would give us 3 application rates, individual colors on or off. That would give us 3. And then we could have any variation of nozzles on or off. And so you can clearly see by having up to 8 combinations of nozzles on or off, we can go from 0 liters per minute all the way up to about 1.575 liters per minute through our combination of selecting nozzles. All you need to do then is to link the density values that we have with the perceived application rate. These are the results that we obtained over a season, and you can see the farmer traditionally, as they drive through the field, would put a blanket rate, so many litres per hectare or gallons per acre, as this is showing, or gallons per minute, and you see the red line, a constant flow rate, irrespective of whether the tree is absent or present, irrespective of the height of the tree. By using our sensors, we can then, you can see from this graph clearly how it changes, the flow rate changes, gallons per minute, both what we calculated and what actually came through the nozzle. And so overall, you can again clearly see the change, the savings we could make by using what in this graph we're referring to as proportional spraying, but it's a precision variable, very select nozzle. The next area, the other fluid, of course, to consider is airflow. And so we've done a lot of trials over the years with these gill ultrasonic anemometers, and we always trying to see how varying canopies change the airflow requirement. Because as we know, everybody knows, spray drifts, and we've known that in spite of countless papers telling us that it drifts. My cri de coeur has always been, well, what are we going to do about it? And so this is what we've done about it. And first of all, we measured airflow requirements through the growing season. So in this case, it's one of our cooperating growers. We're using the Sardi fan system from Croplands in Australia, sent over, and you can clearly see by using a simple gantry on the machine, the gill anemometers on the left-hand side of the canopy of the trees, the air fans are on the right-hand side, and as we move through, we can pick up the air speed being blown into the canopy, the amount coming through the canopy, and therefore adjusting the fans to give us the correct flow rate. And so without any air adjustment, The standard fan setting shows this sort of thing: blow through the canopy, sedimentation onto the ground in between the rows, and some coverage on the next row. In many cases, particularly with air blast sprayers, the better coverage would be on the second row, not on the first row, because of Prandtl and Prandtl's law. Anyway, next, if we adjust it properly, that's what we can get. This was our target, just to get that spray cloud to hover in the canopy. And I'll show you a video of that in a second at work. This, though, to us was very useful work, and to the horticulturalists was fascinating. And so they took this with open arms, this information, where we can show how different varieties have different densities throughout the season. And you can clearly see these are all apple cultivars, you can clearly all the way down, and then you see how the ultrasound signal has changed according to the canopy, where it's all measured at the same week. So let's look at this at work. Hopefully we'll get it going. There we are. So it's 3 fans each side of a mast, as you can clearly see. The fans are driven by small hydraulic motors. In this case, there is a variation that uses electric motors, but for our trial we use the hydraulic motor drive, and we could adjust the oil flow to the hydraulic motors by using a servo system on a valve, and a servo motor on a valve, and adjust the flow according to the signal we were getting for canopy density from our ultrasound system. So you can see how well we did. So the machine's starting up. We're starting to blow spray at this spindle trellis. You can see how narrow the trellis is. The machine is wound right up, and now we're beginning to slow down the fan as the canopy calls for adjustment. So instead of blowing it right through, like traditionally happens, we're changing wherever there's a gap, you'll get a puff coming through. But in the main, we were keeping the spray onto the target. This system worked so well that the grower decided to take up a single-sided spray. So because the spray has been deposited fairly evenly throughout the canopy, in other trials we did on deposition trial, we persuaded the grower to have a trial for a season where they sprayed from one side, and then he continued, and to this day sprays the whole of his farm from one side of the canopy only. This allows him to, if you like, double his spray output. You know, the output hectares per day, or halve his machinery requirement is another way of looking at it. So it has great future, particularly where you have a modern trellis system and a growing system. But of course, once we've started the sprayer, the next thing we need to do is monitor how well it goes. And so we've done various trials over the years, looking at early work here in 2010, looking at monitoring the sprayer output. This is done for a number of reasons. You can see the rows, so these are the rows from above, and you can clearly see if we put on 100% each side of the canopy, we've got the red line. If we forget to switch one side of the sprayer on, we've got the blue line. If we don't go down a row, which it happens occasionally in fruit spraying, because you have so many rows per hectare, it's just mind-blowingly dull for the men spraying, or people spraying, then they occasionally miss, and then they realize they've missed a row, and horror of horrors, the yellow is showing us a double dosing. And that's when you get excessive pesticide residue on fruits, and that's then when the problems start. We're appreciating that people eat apples and grapes directly without any processing in some cases, and apples in particular are used as baby food, you know, ground up into a mush and given to little babies. And so there's always tremendous concern by growers and processors about pesticide residue. So we had a look, how does it work? Why do we want to know? So the management, have it all been sprayed, and then of course traceability, which is order of the day. And we did it simply, again, because of the requirement of the industry, a simple GPS system. This one here, a little Garmin, $90, absolutely useless system. When we could go out to restaurants, you have a difficulty to buy a decent meal for 2 people for $90. So why you'd expect a Garmin to work, beyond me. So we had to move to a better system. So we went to RTK, which was the opposite extreme, frightfully expensive. But by using a flow meter each side of the sprayer, left and right hand side, you can see the horizontal black Raven flow meter in the third photo from the left. Mounted to the sprayer, you can see the sort of thing we did. So here we have the flow rate monitors, simple turbine monitors on left and right hand side of the sprayer. We have our tractor with the GPS system. And so looking below the tractor on the left, we can then take the results that we've obtained and overlay them Google Earth, and you see the results. This system, the GPS RTK, was really expensive, about £15,000 a decade ago. And so many growers coughed a wee bit at that price. So we thought, what else can we do that is simpler? And so I had a researcher from China, Chung Yuan Zai, and he and I developed an RFID system. And you can clearly see on the bottom right, on the end posts of the trellis, we put an RFID card, which will give us the row number, the date it was planted, the variety, the clone, all sorts of detail on the crop. So it could be used by scouts and field walkers at other times, but it, to us, would indicate which row we're in. And then on the front of the tractor, we would have an antenna, RFID antenna, and this then would read the cards on the rows. So this was a much, much simpler system, and resulted in this type of layout for the tablet. A long time ago, we decided we'd use tablets in the cab rather than try and build up screens. And you can see here the tractor coming out of the row with the antenna on the side, left and right at the front of the tractor, and the cards on the edge. So that was a good system, and that's published there. The advantage, though, would be, because we've got this frightfully expensive RTK GPS, would be to fit auto steer, which, as you know, is widely adopted, particularly in the Midwest states of the US, and more of that at the end. But you can see from this graph, which a farmer gave me from his own orchard, was the number of passes carried out by a tractor over the 30-year life of an orchard. And you can see undoubtedly spraying has the most. In upstate New York, might be 14, 15 times in the growing season. So it's very, very common activity. And so if you had auto steer, it would allow the driver to do something else with the tractor at the same time. And so mowing springs to mind. It's the second most popular activity. And so you can see the use of mid-mounted and front-mounted mowers allowing multitasking to take place. Then we wanted to measure the airflow. So with Tomas Palasia, we developed a airflow measuring system based basically on a simple strain gauge. Everyone in this audience will be familiar with such things. And so we can monitor how the strain gauge is deflected according to the amount of air going within the canopy. You appreciate, particularly with apple trees, it's virtually impossible to see how much spray is blowing through the canopy if you're the tractor driver. So if we can automate it, in this case by having these airflow monitors, we can then adjust the sprayer accordingly. And there you can see the results published in Computers and Electronics in Ag. And if any of you in the audience reviewed that paper, I thank you very much for your good help. And so there we have it. Then the other major concern we have, particularly in the research sector with spraying, are droplets. How do we measure where the spray has gone? Penetration and deposition. And so traditionally, top left-hand photo, we use a fluorescent tracer or a food dye tracer in our case. Others use water-sensitive cards, and you festoon the tree or the grapevine with cards, and you come out with a card reader, and you see that it's done X, Y, and Z in the top, middle, and the bottom, which is great. It's a well-used system. It's accepted by some people, but its big problem is it's labor-intensive in the extreme. It's an absolute chore because you've got to put the cards out and you've got to then recover as many cards as you can, which is a great challenge, particularly if the weather's going to change, and so you've got to get them back in quickly. And then you have to spend some time analysing the results. Wouldn't it be nice to have a simple system, an electronic system that could develop that? And so we developed an electronic system, and you can see it here. It looks not a million miles away from a leaf wetness sensor, but is not. A leaf wetness sensor will either say it's wet or dry. This will tell us how wet or how, yes, if you like, how wet or how dry, but how wet the sensor has become. And we plant them through the canopy. These are the flat ones. Ignore the one in the middle. It was our prototype, but just to show you the comparison with a traditional water-sensitive card. And we developed our electronic apple, which you see in the right-hand version, set there by a bunch of grapes, but it's equally applicable to grapes. And we have extremely good results. I'm unable to tell you any more than that because we have a commercial company about to manufacturing it and about to launch it. Okay, so that's electronic deposition. So my epilogue is that sensors can provide us an acceptable estimate of canopy density, quite simply. This information can then be taken to the next stage to adjust airflow and liquid flow in real time, and therefore will improve deposition and reduce drift. And then the monitoring system, be it liquid flow, airflow, droplet monitoring, can result in a more informed decision, and that would assist in application rate, penetration and deposition trials. As this is a pro bono presentation, I'd like just 2 seconds to indulge you with the 3 books that I've written. And as you'll see, you can get them directly from me if you're here in UK. And then I'd like to throw this up to you. Horticultural crops are very, very different to arable crops. So whilst, particularly here in the UK and particularly in Europe, we march forwards with precision farming, and in the Midwest, precision farming on arable field crops, broadacre crops. Horticulture is quite different, particularly at the field level. And so it boils down basically, really, who drives the tractor? And I see the adoption of precision ag throughout Europe and the Midwest states by owner drivers. Tractor drivers who own the farm or the bank own the farm, they own the tractors and drive around on them and spend many hours a day. Whereas in fruit throughout the world, I see a lot of migrant workers who are really, I'm corrected quite often on this point. When I show growers all these whiz-bang ideas and they think, well, that's really good, that's cool, as they say. But they come up to me and say, Andrew, remember the person who's driving the tractor. And so if they're tractor drivers, not sprayer operators. So any adjustments the tractor driver doesn't make, the person in charge of the whole thing. And so relying too much on people who are paid lower wages is unacceptable to some farm owners and farm managers. And of course, look at the cost of investment, etc. Okay, so I throw that up, and it's for people to consider as we pass. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the funding organizations who've given us huge amounts of money over the last 2 decades. In the case of the trials, I've shown you the nozzle and sprayer manufacturers, the 2 crop rating growers that we used, and my colleagues at Cornell, and my postdocs in particular over the years, and then all this army of summer students who've picked leaves and found yellow cards and goodness knows what. And so with that, I'd like to end. Thank you very much.
Well, Andrew, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. Still unmuted. How are we there? Can you hear me? You can. Andrew, thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating, and a real insight into a very, very interesting area of work. We have one question, and I think, Sarah, is everybody unmuted now? Do you think you could unmute everybody, please?
They've all been invited to unmute now. So
that means people can control themselves at their will. Tim, I think you had a question. Do you want to start off, as you were kind enough to put it in the chat box?
Yes, I was wondering. Fantastic presentation. Thank you, chap. Really interesting. I was interested if your work with the autonomous tractor started moving the sprayer heads back and forth towards the canopy. You mentioned obviously T2 as the distance between the sprayer head and the canopy. I was wondering if you are actually able to move that sprayer head in relation to the body that maybe machine vision was actually observing, a couple of trees ahead of the sprayer head and could move it appropriately. Did that work go ahead at all?
You're muted, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Tim. Our lab didn't do that work, but others had done. So the ISA fruit, which was the European Union project with Turin and Wageningen and places like that on apple orchards, they had developed their head system that would move in and out according to tree shape. Yeah, so we didn't choose. We had enough to do with that, trying to replicate their work as well. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Anyone else got a question? I mean, if not, I've got one, Andrew, which was just thinking about your final comments on the fear of technology. And I think across the piece in ag engineering, if you look at particularly autonomous vehicles, that there is a large perception challenge about what they can and what they can't do. And I just wondered if there was you had any thoughts on a roadmap regarding helping, the wider world with the fear of technology.
Yes, undoubtedly. Thanks for that question. Undoubtedly, education is a good answer. As we all know, there's a tremendous aging population in world agriculture. Farmers they've seem to be 58 years at average age since I was a student, but they seem to be getting, as I have passed that 10 years ago, I can see that most of them are still older than I am. And so I think this grasp of just modern things has passed some of them by. But I do see young ones, the students that I've taught over 40 years, are the ones that grasp this subject. And I think that's where our hope lies. I don't think we'll ever convince the aging population who don't want to know, but we can convince youngsters. And so that leads into an observation that, particularly in horticulture, there's a saying in America, well, we're using grandpa's sprayer. It's 1960s technology, we're using grandpa's sprayer. Grandpa's sprayer has no appeal to young people. Young, as we all know, those of us with children and grandchildren know, they're into messaging and text messaging and iPads and God knows what. So they're being brought up with it and so are so familiar with it. And we need to attract them into practical agriculture. And by using old-fashioned sprayers, it's not sexy to them. We need to get up to date and have some modern equipment. And this I find interesting, that it's the young people that will be our salvation, as always.
Yep.
I'm sure I see John Fox. Is John still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
John, it's good to see you. And you probably remember many years ago, you probably thought I was, as a young fellow, the salvation of British agriculture. But anyway,
I have actually been off the map for quite some time.
Right.
I spent most of my time in the last 40 years in Africa.
All right.
And only last year I came back to UK. I'm based in Oxford now.
All right.
So I'm interested to make connections with people I haven't heard of for many years.
Yeah. 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 Good. Good.
Has anyone else got any questions?
Andrew, I have some questions, please, if I may. I work in research and development for tractors for JCB. I was interested to know whether electrostatic spraying had been a subject of your work, or whether there was any potential in it.
Yes. Well, a very nice pun. Is there any potential in electrostatics?
Yeah, that's quite good.
Anyway, yeah. Well done. Yes, it has been a subject of some work in grapevines for a number of seasons. So I'd say that that as background. As second background, it's provided me more air miles in consultancy than any other sprayer failure in the world. And I've spent many journeys overseas looking at failures, primarily due to penetration in the canopy. So in the fruit crop, particularly grapevines, where you have this mass of canopy, particularly table grapes grown on a pergola system, we have problems. We can spray the bunches of grapes because in the pergola, they hang down below the canopy, and the tractor and sprayer is underneath the canopy. And then if you're applying a fungicide, let's say for powdery mildew, you have to get it to penetrate up into the canopy. In the vertical plane, in traditional vineyard rows, again, you have to penetrate into the canopy. And I see that as a major, major issue, and one that has led to huge disappointment in our trials. Plus, this is the beauty of agricultural engineering, where you can blend farming practice into engineering. If you're just a straight mechanical engineer or electrical engineer, they're unaware, in some cases, in the sprayer world certainly, that farmers, again, don't just use liquid spray at low levels. Some put them on, let's say, up to 1,000 litres a hectare, where if you're trying to convince a grower he must use his electrostatic at 100, 110 litres per hectare, and when you turn around and see they add sulphur into that liquid, and that sulphur, it's in there just like porridge. It's a hell of a job to squirt out at 110 litres a hectare. And so these things clog up. Where I have seen it work well is in greenhouse, tomatoes in greenhouses, lettuce, things like that, where you've got a controlled environment, you've got a walking speed, and no wind coming across the greenhouse. So there I see it work well. But sadly, to be diplomatic, the results to us have been extremely disappointing.
My main question for asking was to keep an eye on if we need generators on tractors to provide this electrostatic charge or something. I had another, if I may, and that was most of the sensors you presented today have been attached to the sprayer. And of course, what you see happening in industry is drone mapping, satellite mapping, and it's trying to upload those maps. And I wondered if you saw 3D mapping coming into vineyards and things.
Yes, there's some work done on that, I know. And yes, if we can take it off the tractor or out of that environment, that would be a much better thing. Yes, I do see that as a great potential for development.
Thank you. That was all my questions. Thank you.
I'm busy typing it all up. That's fantastic. Thank you. I think we've probably got time for one more question if anybody has one. Speak up, or forever keep your peace, folks. It is...
Richard Robinson's got his hand up.
Richard Robinson's got his hand up. He's not bracing himself for going around a corner then. Richard, you need to unmute yourself. You're on mute, Richard. There we go. Probably something about 4G connectivity, I'm thinking.
He's on his boat.
Yeah, we've I think he's driving, Paul, actually. I think he's driving from what he said at the outset, or he's being driven, rather. You're back, Richard. Say it
travelling
again.
along the A. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we've alternated between 1, 2, and 3G and occasional bits of 4. But no, I just wanted to thank Andrew and the institution and Sarah and everybody for organising an absolutely brilliant event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
We would welcome your feedback if you want to drop Sarah a line afterwards about this, because I, for one, have thoroughly enjoyed it and got a lot from it, and can see a great deal of parallels in other work I've been involved in as well. So thank you, Andrew, for your time today and for your candour with regard to A, your presentation, and B, the Q&A at the end as well. It's 1 minute to 2 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. By all means, we would welcome any suggestions for future lunchtime lectures. As I say, it's been a thoroughly insightful and enjoyable experience, and I'm very grateful to you for that, Andrew, as well.
Right.
Thank you very much.